Les damos la más cordial bienvenida a un nuevo episodio de Historias de Familia Rota. Como siempre, es un placer contar con su presencia. Nos gustaría saber desde qué rincón del planeta nos sintonizan. Dicho esto, es momento de adentrarnos en el relato que hemos preparado para ustedes. Era una de esas noches de Portland en las que la lluvia no solo caía, se clavaba en la piel como agujas. Todavía recuerdo el modo en que el viento aullaba por el estrecho callejón detrás de nuestro edificio de apartamentos, trayendo el olor a asfalto mojado y basura en descomposición. Chloe tiró de mi mano mientras nos apresurábamos a pasar junto a los contenedores, sus pequeñas botas chapoteando en los charcos. Solo tenía 6 años, pero sus ojos captaban cosas que los míos se habían entrenado hacía mucho para ignorar. «Mamá, mira». Su voz atravesó la tormenta. Se soltó y corrió hacia un rincón oscuro junto a los contenedores. La seguí con el corazón latiéndome con fuerza y vi lo que la había detenido en seco. Un pequeño gato yacía arrugado en el suelo. Su pelaje estaba empapado y enmarañado, una pata doblada en un ángulo antinatural. Cuando Chloe extendió la mano, el animal se estremeció débilmente, emitiendo un sonido que era mitad siseo, mitad llanto. Me agaché y vi el tajo en su flanco. Las reveladoras heridas punzantes de un ataque de perro. La sangre se había diluido con la lluvia, manchando su pelaje anaranjado como óxido. «Mamá, está herido», susurró Chloe con la voz temblorosa. «No podemos dejarlo aquí. Morirá». Me mordí el labio. Ella no lo entendía. Apenas podíamos mantenernos calientes y alimentadas en aquel sótano húmedo que llamábamos hogar. Nuestro alquiler ya era una lucha y ni siquiera se permitían mascotas. Una boca más que alimentar no era algo que pudiera permitirme, pero al mirar los ojos grandes y anegados en lágrimas de Chloe, vi más que lástima por un gato callejero. Vi la desesperación de una niña que quería salvar algo porque no podía salvar la vida que estaba viviendo. Abrí la boca para decirle que no, para explicarle cómo funcionaba el mundo, que a veces te alejas porque no tienes otra opción. Pero la palabra se me atascó en la garganta. En lugar de eso, me quité la bufanda, la envolví alrededor del animal tembloroso y lo levanté suavemente en mis brazos. Su frágil cuerpo era sorprendentemente ligero, cada costilla presionando contra mis palmas. El rostro de Chloe se iluminó a través de la lluvia. Apretó la mejilla contra el bulto mientras nos apresurábamos a volver al sótano. Nuestro hogar no era más que un trastero reconvertido bajo un edificio de apartamentos que se hundía. El techo goteaba, el aire olía a moho y la única ventana enrejada no daba a nada más que hormigón. Aún así, era todo lo que teníamos. Dejé al gato sobre una manta vieja mientras Chloe se arrodillaba a su lado, susurrándole palabras tranquilizadoras como si solo su voz pudiera mantenerlo con vida. Busqué entre nuestras escasas pertenencias algo útil, una toalla vieja, un cuenco desconchado que llené de agua. Mientras trabajaba, mi mente se desvió sin querer hacia la larga cadena de decisiones y desgracias que me habían traído hasta aquí. Los padres que había perdido demasiado joven. La educación que no pude terminar. El hombre al que a mí enterré antes incluso de que Chloe naciera. Sacudí el recuerdo y me centré en el animal que tenía delante. Sus ojos, ámbar y vidriosos, seguían cada uno de mis movimientos. Se aferraba a la vida con la misma terquedad que yo conocía demasiado bien. Chloe acarició el pelaje húmedo del gato y me miró con una sonrisa que atravesó la penumbra. «Mamá», dijo suavemente, «su pelo es del color del pan de jengibre. Así es como voy a llamarlo». «Gingerbread», repetí, la palabra extraña pero cálida en mi lengua. En ese momento, me di cuenta de que, al salvar a este gato, Chloe también había encontrado un poco de esperanza para sí misma. Y quizás, solo quizás, yo también. Cuando era pequeña pensaba que mi vida seguiría el camino firme que mis padres habían trazado para mí. Mi padre era un soldado, el tipo de hombre que se mantenía erguido en cada fotografía con el uniforme planchado y una sonrisa un poco demasiado orgullosa. Mi madre era bibliotecaria, tranquila y gentil, su mundo construido con estanterías de libros y las historias susurradas que me contaba antes de dormir. Juntos, me hicieron creer que el mundo podía ser seguro, que mientras nos tuviéramos el uno al otro, nada podría quebrarnos. Esa ilusión se hizo añicos cuando tenía 9 años. Mi padre no volvió a casa de una misión. Todo lo que recibimos fue una bandera doblada y palabras de honor que no hicieron nada para llenar la silla vacía en nuestra mesa. Mi madre intentó ser fuerte, pero el dolor pesaba sobre su frágil figura. Para cuando yo tenía 15 años, la enfermedad se la había llevado a ella también. Verla desvanecerse fue como ver la luz de mi propio mundo parpadear y morir. Cuando se fue, el pequeño apartamento de 2 dormitorios que teníamos en una vivienda subvencionada fue recuperado por el Estado. Recuerdo estar de pie en la acera agrietada con una bolsa de basura llena de ropa, mirando el edificio que había sido mi único hogar y dándome cuenta de que no tenía ningún otro lugar a donde ir. Me dije a mí misma que seguiría adelante. Soñaba con ser periodista, alguien que contara la verdad, alguien que importara. Incluso logré matricularme en la universidad aferrándome a esa frágil esperanza. Pero la matrícula era implacable y las becas solo alcanzaban hasta cierto punto. Trabajaba a tiempo parcial, me saltaba comidas, estudiaba hasta altas horas de la noche, pero ninguna cantidad de esfuerzo podía cubrir las facturas. Finalmente, abandoné otra estadística en un sistema al que no le importaba. Acepté trabajos donde quiera que pude encontrarlos, de camarera, limpiando, incluso de barman. Ahí fue donde conocí a Jason. No era perfecto, pero tenía una especie de encanto salvaje que me atrajo. Hablaba de escapar de la rutina, de encontrar atajos hacia una vida mejor. Por un tiempo, le creí. Me permití imaginar que podríamos salir juntos del arroyo. Entonces, una noche, no volvió a casa. Me enteré, a través de susurros y medias verdades, se había enredado en algo peligroso, algún plan que prometía dinero rápido pero que terminó en una bolsa para cadáveres. Se había ido antes de que pudiera siquiera despedirme. En los días siguientes, cuando sentí que no me quedaba nada, descubrí que estaba embarazada. Recuerdo estar sentada en el borde de un colchón gastado, con la prueba aferrada en mis manos, mirando las 2 tenues líneas. Mi primer instinto fue el miedo. ¿Cómo podría criar a un niño si ni siquiera podía cuidar de mí misma? Durante días consideré cada opción, cada escapatoria. Pero en el fondo, sabía que este bebé era todo lo que me quedaba de Jason y quizás la única razón que me quedaba para seguir adelante. Así que la elegí a ella. Elegí a Chloe incluso antes de que tuviera un nombre. No era la vida que soñaba, pero era la vida que tenía y lucharía por ella con todo lo que había en mí. Después de que Jason se fue y los pocos ahorros que tenía se evaporaron, me encontré vagando de un sofá prestado a otro, arrastrando mis pertenencias en una bolsa de lona mientras llevaba a Chloe en la cadera. Esos días se confunden en mi memoria. Viajes en autobús que olían a diésel, noches en refugios donde las luces nunca se atenuaban, y mañanas en las que despertaba con el cuello rígido por dormir sentada en una silla de plástico. Me aferraba a la diminuta mano de Chloe como si fuera la única ancla que me impedía hundirme. Una tarde, cuando la lluvia parecía interminable, me crucé con una mujer que lo cambió todo. Su nombre era Lucille, una viuda anciana que había vivido en Portland toda su vida. Me encontró fuera de una tienda de comestibles, con Chloe temblando bajo mi abrigo, ambas empapadas. Lucille tenía unos ojos agudos que no se perdían mucho y después de una larga mirada, me puso una taza de café caliente en la mano y me preguntó por mi vida. Al final de esa conversación, me ofreció una oportunidad trabajo de limpieza en un edificio de oficinas del centro donde ella solía dirigir al personal. No era glamuroso, pero era estable. Con eso llegó una pequeña habitación, una unidad en el sótano que nadie quería. Las paredes estaban húmedas, la pintura se desconchaba en parches desiguales y la única ventana estaba medio enterrada bajo la acera. Desde la calle de arriba todo lo que podíamos ver eran zapatos que pasaban y la sombra ocasional. Aún así, era nuestro. Extendí un colchón en el suelo, colgué una manta para cubrir la pared agrietada y le dije a Chloe que era un castillo subterráneo. Ella me creyó. La vida se asentó en un ritmo agotador. Cada noche, después de arropar a Chloe, arrastraba un trapeador y un cubo por los resonantes pasillos de ese edificio de oficinas. Las luces fluorescentes tumbaban sobre mí. El olor de los productos de limpieza me quemaba la nariz y fregaba hasta que me dolían los brazos. Mis manos se agrietaban y sangraban por la lejía. Pero seguía trabajando. Algunos de los empleados de la oficina pasaban a mi lado por los pasillos con sonrisas tensas o miradas despectivas como si yo fuera parte del mobiliario. Otros ni siquiera me veían. De vuelta en el sótano, Chloe parloteaba sobre el día en que tendría su propia habitación con cortinas rosas, o cómo invitaría a sus amigas a fiestas de pijamas. Yo asentía y sonreía, aunque mi pecho se oprimía de culpa. Quería darle todo. Sin embargo, todo lo que tenía era un colchón húmedo y un techo con goteras. Cuando Gingerbread entró en nuestras vidas, las cosas cambiaron, aunque solo fuera un poco. Chloe lo mimaba, lo envolvía en bufandas, dándole restos de nuestra mesa, susurrándole secretos en su pelaje como si él pudiera llevarse sus preocupaciones. Verla reír mientras él jugaba con un hilo hizo que el sótano se sintiera menos como una jaula y más como un hogar. Por primera vez en mucho tiempo, la esperanza se acurrucó silenciosamente dentro de mí. No era mucho, pero era suficiente para seguir adelante. La condición de Gingerbread no mejoró como yo esperaba. A pesar de mis vendajes improvisados y los cuencos de agua, se debilitaba día a día. Su pata colgaba flácidamente y su respiración se volvió superficial, estertorosa en la quietud de nuestro sótano. Chloe lloró hasta quedarse dormida más de una vez, abrazándolo contra su pecho. No podía soportar ver su esperanza desvanecerse de esa manera. Así que, una tarde lluviosa, envolví al pequeño gato en una manta vieja y le dije a Chloe que lo llevaríamos a ver a un médico de verdad. Sus ojos se abrieron de par en par, y por primera vez en semanas caminó a saltitos a mi lado mientras andábamos por las calles resbaladizas. La clínica veterinaria no estaba lejos, un modesto edificio de ladrillo con la huella de una pata pintada en la puerta de cristal. Dentro, olía ligeramente a antiséptico y heno fresco, una extraña combinación que al instante me recordó tanto a hospitales como a graneros. Dudé en la recepción, mi mano apretando la manta, insegura de si podía permitirme siquiera estar allí. Fue entonces cuando apareció. «Puedo ayudarla». Su voz era tranquila, firme. Levanté la vista para ver a un hombre alto con una bata blanca, su pelo oscuro salpicado de gris en las sienes. Sus ojos, de un profundo color avellana, se suavizaron cuando se posaron en Chloe, que sostenía el bulto en sus brazos. «Es nuestro gato», soltó Chloe con voz urgente. «Está muy malherido. Por favor, tiene que curarlo». Abrí la boca para disculparme, para explicar que no tenía dinero, but the words tangled in my throat. Seman, drive. Jonathan Reed, as his beige red, took the bundle gently from Chloe's arms and peeled back the blanket. Examined Gingerbread with practiced hands, his brow furrowing. He's been through a fight, Jonathan murmured almost to himself. But he's a fighter. Let's see what we can do. I carried the cat into the exam room, and without thinking, Chloe and I followed. I stood quietly in the corner, watching him work. His movement were precise but gentle, the way he cleaned the wound and set the broken paw. When Chloe asked questions, will it hurt him? Is he going to die? Jonathan answered with patience, never once brushing her aside. When he finally looked up, I braced myself for the question about payment. Instead, I smiled faintly. No charge. A deception chance. The relief that swept over me was sharp enough to sting. I managed the weak thank you, but my cheeks bent with shame. I hated feeling like a charity case, hated that he probably saw me as nothing more than the cleaning woman from his building. Because he recognized him now. Jonathan worked in the very office where he scrubbed floors each night. I had seen him once or twice stepping out of the elevator, polished and professional, while he kept my head down with a map in hand. I expected pity, maybe even discomfort, but what I saw in his expression was different. He didn't look at me like he was invisible. He looked at me like he mattered. Chloe, oblivious to my turmoil, sat cross-legged on the floor beside the exam table, her hands stroking Gingerbread's bandaged paw. She gazed up at Jonathan with absolute trust, as though he had descended like some kind of hero just for her. And in that quiet, sterile room, something shifted. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of a connection that would change the course of our lives. It didn't take long for travel to find us. A week after Gingerbread came back from the clinic, Lowell and Lord showed up at the basement door. He was a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl, the kind of WHO enjoyed reminding tenants of their place. He had me owing down here, he said, pushing past me, before he could protest. His flashlight beam swept across the damp concrete floor until it landed on Chloe. WHO was cradling gingerbread in her arms. Seket blinked sleepily at the intrusion. The landlord's mouth twisted into a sneer. No pets. It's in Celis. You know the rules. He tried to explain. Just a stray. We're helping. Just temporary, but he cut me off with a wave of his hand. If the cat goes or you both go, you got until the end of the week. When he left, slamming the door behind him, he sank to the floor. Chloe rushed to my side, whispering that everything would be okay, but he could barely hear her. My chest felt like it was collapsing. I had fought so hard to give her even this meager shelter, and now it was about to be ripped away. That night, when Chloe fell asleep clutching gingerbread, he cried quietly into my pillow. I had no backup plan, no savings, no family to call. The thought of dragging my daughter back to the shelters, of watching her sleep and the flickering lights again, broke me in a way nothing else had. The next day, as I left work, I nearly walked straight into Jonathan. I was standing by the doorway, his hands in the pockets of his coat, as though he had been waiting. You don't look okay, I said gently. He tried to brush it off, but the damn broke. Wet spilled out about the landlord, about Chloe, about the cat that had become our only comfort. To my embarrassment, my voice cracked and tears slid down my cheeks. Jonathan didn't flinch. I just listened. Then, after a pause, I said the words that changed everything. Come stay with me, both of you. There's plenty of room. He shook my head immediately. I can't. We'd be bedden. People would talk. Andy, Maya, I interrupted softly. You and Chloe need a safe place. That's what matters. Let me help. For a long moment, he stood frozen, pride whirring with desperation. Every instinct told me not to accept charity, not to let anyone see how fragile he really was. But then he thought of Chloe, of the way her small body curled up against gingerbread each night, clinging to scraps of comfort. He couldn't let her lose that too. So he nodded. When we stepped into Jonathan's apartment for the first time, Chloe gasped. The windows were wide and bright, the walls painted in soft earth tones, the air free of mildew. She ran from room to room, her laughter echoing in a way she hadn't had in years. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, clutching the strap of my back. We'll now keep, he said firmly. I'll clean, cook, whatever you need. Jonathan only smiled. You don't owe me anything. But he insisted, and from that day forward, he worked quietly and he saw me, polishing counters, folding laundry, finding ways to repay a kindness he didn't feel he deserved. He had just begun to settle into the fragile rhythm of our new life when the storm arrived Jonathan's door in the shape of his mother. Helen Reed was the kind of woman you noticed before she even spoke. Tall, impeccably dressed, her silver hair swept back from a face carved in sharp lines of authority. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent her life giving orders and expecting obedience. I first saw her standing in the doorway one Saturday morning. A designer handbag looped over her arm, her eyes narrowing the moment they landed on me. And who exactly are you? She is, her tongue clipped as though he were a trespasser. Before he could answer, Chloe peeked from behind me, clutching gingerbread. Helen's gaze swept over her, then returned to me with something colder than disdain. It was calculation. Jonathan emerged from the kitchen, clearly caught off guard. Mom, this is Maya, and that's her daughter, Chloe. Helen's eyebrows arched. And why are they here in your home? I felt my face flash. Before Jonathan could speak, he tried to explain, just temporary, just until he can find something else. But Helen cut me off with a short, humorless laugh. Oh, easy. A single mother with a child and a sub-story. Jonathan, really? You've always been too soft-hearted. This, she gestured at me with a wave of her manicured hand. This is nothing but a gold digger who saw her chance. The wet struck like a slap. I stood frozen, shame and anger warring inside me. I wanted to shout back, to tell her she didn't know me, didn't know the nights I'd spent scrubbing floors, until my fingers bled, didn't know the hunger I'd hidden for my daughter. But the lump in my throat was too heavy. Jonathan's voice broke through my silence, sharper than I'd ever heard it. Enough, ma'am. Helen blinked at him, clearly unaccustomed to resistance. Maya is not what you think, continued firmly. She and Chloe needed help, and you wanted them here. That's my decision, and if you can't respect it, then maybe you should leave. For a moment, Serum felt suspended in air. Helen's lips tightened into a thin line, her eyes flashing with fury. He could see the battle raging inside her. She needed to control her son, she disbelieved that he would defy her so openly. Finally, she turned on her heel, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood as she stalked out. The door slammed behind her, leaving silence in her wake. He stood there trembling, still clutching Chloe's hand. Jonathan crossed the room and laid his hand gently on my shoulder. Don't listen to her, he said softly. I know who you are. For the first time, I believed he really did. In that moment, the line was drawn. Helen Reed was no longer just Jonathan's mother. She was the shadow looming over us, the villain who would stop at nothing to tear apart the fragile happiness we were building. The weeks that followed Helen's outburst should have been unbearable. But inside Jonathan's apartment, life began to take on a different rhythm. Each day felt like we were building something small and fragile, brick by brick. Jonathan would come home from the clinic in the evenings. His coat them from the Portland rain, and we'd share simple dinners at the kitchen table meatloaf, soup, whatever he could piece together from the groceries he insisted on stacking. Chloe would chat endlessly about school, about gingerbread antics, about dreams she didn't yet realize were too big for a basement well. Jonathan listened to her with the same patience he gave his patients, nodding as if every word mattered. When Chloe went to bed, Jonathan and he would linger. At first, it was small talk, surface level, careful. But slowly, the walls came down. One night, his voice grew quiet as he told me about his wife. Her name had been Claire. She died in a car accident 5 years earlier, a sudden and senseless loss that had gutted him. He admitted he hadn't let anyone close since. He remembers sitting there in the dim glow of the kitchen lamp, listening to the way his voice cracked, the grief still raw beneath his steady exterior. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in my pain. Our tragedies were different, but the hollow spaces they left inside us felt eerily the same. In return, I told him pieces of my own story. The parents I lost, the dreams I'd buried, Jason, and the heartbreak that left me raising Chloe alone. Yes, they didn't hold pity when he spoke. They held understanding, a quiet recognition that settled into my bones like warmth after a long chill. The night grew longer, the rain heavier, but inside those walls I found something I hadn't dared hope for: peace. On New Year's Eve, we stayed in. Chloe insisted on making decorations from scraps of colored tape, taping them to the windows while gingerbread poured the falling confetti. At midnight, as fireworks cracked faintly in the distance, Chloe squeezed between us and the couch, her small voice carrying more weight than she knew. I want us to always be together, she whispered, her eyes shining with the kind of hope only a child could summon. Me, Mom, and you, Jonathan. I froze, my heart latched in my throat. Jonathan looked at her, then at me, and in that moment, something in his gaze shifted, resolve, tenderness, something more than either of us had dared to name. He reached into his pocket, and before he could breathe, he held out a simple silver ring. Maya, he said softly, I don't want this to be temporary. I want us to build a life together. Will you marry me? My hand shook as tears bled my vision. Chloe gasped, her smile wide enough to light the whole room. I said yes, and for the first time in so many years, happiness didn't feel like something borrowed. It felt like it belonged to me. Our wedding wasn't the kind people write about in magazines. There were no chandeliers, no grand halls, no orchestras wailing as he walked down the aisle. It was small, intimate, just a few close friends from Jonathan's clinic. Lucille and Chloe bouncing excitedly in her dresses, flower petals stuck to her shoes. We stood under the arch of a community garden. Portland rain misting lightly against the canopy of twinkling streetlights. He wore a simple green dress borrowed from a neighbor, and Jonathan looked almost boyish in his grey suit, Celine's up grief and responsibility, softened by joy. When we exchanged bows, Chloe squeezed between us, her tiny hands clutching both of ours. As Jonathan slipped Serene onto my finger, Chloe's voice broke through, trembling with sincerity. "Can I call you Dad now?" she asked, her eyes wide, her lips trembling in that way that made my chest ache. Jonathan crouched down to her level, tears welling in his eyes. "Only if you really want to," I whispered. She threw her arms around his neck. "Ido, you're my dad." I will never forget the look on his face in that moment, relief, love, and the silent promise that he would never let her down. After that day, life settled into something I had only dared to dream about. Chloe had her own sunny room with shelves for her books and toys. Gingerbread stretched lazily across a window seat, fattening from the treats Chloe snagged him. And I, for the first time in years, had the luxury of thinking about something beyond survival. It started almost as a joke. I wrote little blog posts about Gingerbread's recovery, Chloe's imaginative games with him, so we strutted around the apartment as if he were waking. I posted pictures, Chloe hugging him, Gingerbread balancing on the edge of a chair. Even his mischievous habit of knocking pens off Jonathan's desk. I thought only a handful of people would ever see them. But within weeks, the blog exploded. Messages poured in from strangers who said Gingerbread's story gave them hope that our little family reminded them not to give up. I didn't earn money from it, not at first, but the validation meant something. For once, people weren't looking down on me as the cleaning woman, the single mother in a damp basement. They saw me as someone who had endured. Someone who mattered. Jonathan engaged me, often sitting beside me in the evenings as it talked, his hand brushing me, his smile full of pride. Chloe loved reading the comments aloud, giggling when someone called Gingerbread a miracle cat. Those were golden days, fragile and fleeting. I let myself believe they would last. But Helen never congratulated us, never smiled at Chloe calling Jonathan dead. She came to the wedding, but stayed stiff, her eyes sharp as glass, her hands folded like clenched fists. And at the wed, though she visited less often, I felt her presence like a shadow pressing against the walls. I should have known peace like ours could never exist without a storm following close behind. It was a grey afternoon, second when the Portland rain seemed determined to seep into every crack of the city. Jonathan was still at the clinic finishing late appointments, and Chloe was upstairs in her room, drawing. I was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Helen standing there, dressed immaculately as always, a polished smile plastered across her face. In her hands, she carried a box of pastries and a tin of tea. "I thought I'd drop by," she said smoothly, though her tone carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "Just a little piece of aim. Every instinct told me to keep the door closed. But politeness, or perhaps naivety, made me step aside." She breezed past me, her perfume filling the air, and settled herself at the dining table as though she owned it. "I brought your favorite chamomile," she said, placing the tin on the table. "Why don't we share a cup? Just the two of us. It's time we learn to get along." I moved to the kitchen, my pulse quick and in easy boiled water. I cut sight up her in the hallway mirror that hung just at the right angle to reflect the table. Helen's face was tight with focus as she pulled a small vial from her handbag. My breath caught in my throat. With a quick glance toward the kitchen, she tipped a few drops of something clear into one of the cups before sliding the vial back into her bag. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed denial. It couldn't bear what I thought, but the image of the liquid welling in the cup was undeniable. My hands trembled as I carried the tray back into the room. "Here we are," I said, forcing my voice steady as I set the cups down. My heart hammered so loudly, I was sure she could hear it. Helen slid the tainted cup toward me with a faint smile. "Two new beginnings," she said. In that instant, survival instincts I didn't know we had to cover. I shifted the cups, pretending to adjust the sauces, and placed the poisoned one in front of her instead. She raised it to her lips without hesitation. The first sip was followed by a faint frown, then a cough. Within minutes, her face blanched, her hand clutching at her chest. The cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Chloe, he shouted, my voice cracking. Stay upstairs. Call 911. He knelt beside Helen as her body convulsed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Sirens wailed in the distance minutes later, though they felt like hours. The paramedics rushed in, lifting her to a stretcher, their radios crackling with urgency. At the hospital, toxicology test confirmed what you already knew: poison. The police arrived soon after, asking questions, coming through the apartment. They found the vial still in her handbag, fingerprints all over it. There was no denying it. When Jonathan finally had the call drained from his face as the officers explained. He sat heavily in a chair, his hands pressed against his temples, disbelief etched into the line of his face. He stood nearby, numb. The woman who had despised me from the beginning had just tried to kill me and nearly killed herself instead. It was a moment away fragile piece shattered completely, leaving nothing but fear, betrayal, and the truth too sharp to ignore. Helen survived, though the doctors said it was a narrow escape. When she finally regained strength enough to speak, the police were already waiting. He was there too, standing just outside the hospital room, with Jonathan's hand clasped tightly in mine. What she revealed that day shook us both to the core. It wasn't my idea, she whispered hoarsely, her eyes darting between us. It was Amanda. She told me, you'd never belong to me again if Maya stayed in your life. She said if he didn't act, I'd lose you forever. Jonathan stiffened beside me. Amanda Brooks, his childhood friend, the one who had haved family gatherings, WHO always seemed to find reasons to call him. WHO looked at me with barely concealed disdain. Suddenly, her subtle digs, her offers to help out, all of it made a sinister kind of sense. The detectives pressed her for details, and the whole story unraveled. Amanda had fed Helen poison disguised as several supplements, telling her it would help calm her nerves, then urged her to use it against me. She had fueled Helen's fear of losing her son until it twisted into something reckless. But the investigation didn't stop there. Digging deeper, the police uncovered something even darker. Amanda's fingerprints and phone records connected her to the accident that killed Jonathan's first wife. What had always been written off as a tragic twist of fate now had a face and a motive. Amanda had wanted Jonathan for herself for years, and she'd been willing to destroy anyone in her path to get him. He watched Jonathan's face as the truth sank in. His grief for Clea, his anger at Amanda, his devastation at his own mother's betrayal of it collided in his eyes. He reached for his hand, and he clung to mine as though it was the only steady thing left in his world. Amanda was arrested. I'll never forget the sight of her being led out of the red house in handcuffs, her once carefully constructed image in ruins. For me, it was justice, but for Jonathan, it was something closer to release. A terrible weight he'd carried for years finally lifted, even if it came with no scars. Helen changed after that. She wept when she realized she had been nothing more than a pawn in Amanda's cruelty. For weeks, she apologized to me, to Jonathan, to Chloe. He didn't forgive her immediately. Trust isn't something you rebuild with words alone. But when he saw her cradle our newborns and months later, tears streaming down her face as she whispered promises into his tiny ears, he knew she was trying. And that had to be enough. Life moved forward. Chloe thrived in school, proudly introducing herself as Jonathan's daughter. Gingerbread long-haired like a king, across the back of the couch, his once broken body, now strong and sleek. My blog grew into something bigger than he ever expected. And with Jonathan's engagement, it ended into a real care. And me, he grew, too. For years, he had lived in basements and shadows, believing love and stability were things other people had. But standing in our home, with Jonathan's arms around me, Chloe laughing in the yard, and the baby cooing in Helen's embrace, he finally felt what it meant to belong. Our journey hadn't been easy. It had been full of storms, betrayals, and near disasters. But somehow, through it all, we found our way to healing. And in that healing, we found our revenge, not be destroying those WHO haters, but be living a life they never thought we deserved. We were a family, at last. Gracias por acompañarme en esta aventura. Si te sentiste parte de esta historia, suscríbete para que sigamos creciendo juntos. Recuerda que cada paso cuenta en tu propio viaje. Nos vemos en la próxima parada.